So this is a comparison of the analog modes on the Fractal FX8, the mono BBD mode, versus the Helix Adriatic delay, versus the Nemesis analog delay, the Timeline D-bucket delay, and finally the DD500 analog delay. So I've got this dry loop of guitar. Just sustained chords, basically. Plenty of space for us to be able to hear the character of the delay. So let's go for the Adriatic first. As you can see, the feedback is quite high, 77%. Maximum BBD size, 0 noise, and a little bit of modulation. And you can hear there's quite a bit of saturation in the tail of the Adriatic delay, especially when the feedback is that high. My whole purpose with comparing these delays is to compare the on the edge of oscillation and oscillation tones. So that's the Adriatic delay. You can hear it gets a little gritty. Over to the FX8 Mono Delay. Now, the FX8 is adding quite a bit of extra noise, but that shouldn't prevent us from being able to hear what it's doing. So everything is at default, apart from the feedback and a little bit of modulation. But you can hear that the FX8 is actually fairly similar to the Adriatic delay. The differences become more apparent when you start cranking the feedback. I'll do that in a moment, but let's move on to the Timeline. You can hear that all that noise goes away, so there's definitely something awry with my FX8 setup. Now, I can hear right off the bat with the Timeline, there's more transient detail than the Helix and the FX8 on this D-bucket mode. We can get rid of some of that by tweaking the filter and the grit parameters. Turning the filter up softens those those echo repeats. Now the grit is currently quite high. I'm going to turn it all the way off. That's completely clean. Let's go up to 12 o'clock. And you can hear it's more dirty now. So with the grit at 12 o'clock and the filter around 2 o'clock, we get a similar characteristic to the other two units. Let's jump over to the DD500. Now what I'm hearing is that the DD500 is definitely more distorted and slightly crushed sounding than the other units. There's a certain edge to the echoes that you don't get with the Helix and the FX8 and the timeline. And we're on the highest number of stages, so that gives us the highest amount of internal headroom. Let's jump over to the Nemesis. Now again, with the Nemesis, you can hear that the transients on each echo are very obvious, so we can turn down the intensity parameter to darken those a little bit. Turn up the feedback to compensate a little. And you can hear when you do that with the Nemesis, it's much smoother than the other delays. You can hear that the general character is much darker, much more reverb-like than the other delays. But you also lose some of that resonance and some of that character. The intensity parameter makes a big difference on the Nemesis. Just past 12 o'clock, and we get more detail and more resonance in the tails. And you can hear that the echoes, progressively, they get more filtered and more distorted as they tail away. So that's kind of on the edge oscillation tones, but what if we want to go full oscillation? I've got a compressor in my Helix signal path, and I should say that all of the delays are connected to the Helix, if that wasn't already obvious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the Adriatic, and I'll feed it some of the guitar, and I'll turn up the feedback and get it to self-oscillate. And you'll hear the general character of the delay. So as you can hear, when you crank the feedback on the Adriatic delay, you get quite a nice high-pitched tone that's very squealy. Let's jump over to the FX8 and we'll do a similar thing. And as you can hear, that was not pleasing because the output clips very easily when you do that on the FX8. Now, to avoid that, I could also put a compressor on the FX8. So if we come back to my chain and we add a compressor after the delay, and let's just make sure that the settings are going to do what we want. Thresholds minus 30-ish should be enough. Ratio 2 is fine. Release, we'll have a really long release. And then we'll come back over to our delay. And let's try that again. So now the compressor should hopefully prevent the unit from clipping at the output. If we go over to the compressor, you can see we now have a constant gain reduction of about minus 18 dB. So my advice, if you want to do this kind of thing with the FX8, essentially painting textures with oscillation tones, you have to have a compressor after the delay, because the delay blocks don't really seem to have the internal saturation and compression in order to handle those kind of squealing feedback tones. There are no parameters for that kind of thing. Basically, we've got drive where we can add a little bit of saturation, but there's nothing on any of the pages that allows us to do that. Which I think is a little bit of a shame, because it means that I have to give up one of the blocks for a compressor. I don't necessarily need to do that with the Helix. Let's go over to the timeline and do the same thing. So as you can hear, we have our oscillation tone, and it's not completely clipping the circuit, but it's not as pleasing to me as the Adriatic delay, because there's all this low-end mush. That could be quite a cool sound. That's not really what I'm looking for. Let's do the same thing with the DD500. And this right here is the feedback knob. So, with the DD500, initially the tone is quite nice, but once it starts to clip, it takes on this really distorted characteristic that I don't really like. Again, an internal compression stage that I had some control over on that model would probably alleviate that issue. On the Adriatic delay, just to mention, that's effectively what the headroom control is doing. If I move this headroom all the way up to plus 12 dB, then I start to get similar results from the Adriatic delay as I do from the other delays. Usually, I always leave it at 0, or if I want an extra little bit of pumping to the sound, I'll bring it down to -3, even down to -8. So let's try this with the final delay, the Nemesis. So as you can hear with the Nemesis, you don't get that rising sensation when you turn up the feedback knob. It's almost like an on-off switch, that the top position activates the oscillation, and then just a notch below it, it deactivates. That doesn't really feel that natural. And if you listen to the tone, we have that similar muddy quality that we have on the timeline. It's not as distorted, and it's not taking our heads off. But there's no real character to it. It's very flat, very lifeless. So, just to finish off, I'll go through all the delays again, doing that same test, without any yakking, without any chit-chat from me, just so that you can hear them all side by side. So for me, the FX8 and the Helix, they kind of win hands down. These other three delays are very good, some of the best delays on the market, but for this particular type of sound, I think the FX8 and the Adriatic delay, they're clear winners. And I think the Adriatic delay is the winner, closely followed by the FX8. I hope that was of some interest. The video's quite long, so apologies for that. But hit like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I tend to do kind of functional ambience, weird sounds in my demos. I don't really do the usual blues licks or metal licks or anything like that. I'm looking for textures. Thanks for watching.